Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation for April 2009. Madam Clerk, for consideration of applications, routine applications.
Yes, good evening. We have routine application. I move PD2 for the Police Department, approval to use $10,000. PD3 for the Police Department, approval to use $50,700. NW1 Nathaniel Witherall, transfer of $76,625. HD6 Health Department, approval to use $13,960, and again, I so move.
It's been moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Mason. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. At this time, I would note that Ms. Barton had indicated to me that she would not be present today due to a family emergency. So we wish her well in those endeavors. Our non-routine applications, for which I call Mr. Mason, our Budget Committee Chairman.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. NW2 is an item before us. I'd like to move for $400,000 as an additional appropriation for Nathaniel Witherall for professional medical and dental and other services. And I so move that item.
Moved by Mr. Mason. Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Does Nathaniel Witherall want to give us an update on this application? Ray Augustine.
We're asking for the $400,000. Basically, majority of it is to support our variable components of our cost structure. We've been changing the way we operate at Nathaniel Witherall and bringing in a conversion from all long-term to short-term, and that conversion continues. That conversion, even though it has an increase in revenues that's quite substantial, it also has a cost increase that is not totally the same amount, but it is about $100 some odd a day. And what we're really trying to do is right now recoup some of those dollars that we've had over a period of time.
Questions or discussions? Mr. Simon.
So we went back, we asked the controller and the budget director to look at the revenue for your department and annualize it, and it came out to be, maybe we'll ask Mr. Geiger directly, I think it was $500,000 over budget based upon where you are. And this appropriation would be for $400,000 of that. And we said we would put $96,000 of this under contingency to be released by the BET in June when we saw the results of the revenue through May. So we have to add that condition to release to this appropriation if we vote for that. The Budget Committee really just voted for the $304,000 and said we would look at the other 96 because if your census remains higher, you're going to have additional costs. And the $96,000 is your estimate of the additional costs you're going to incur.
That would be my estimate. I would say it ranges from anywhere from about 50 to the 96,000, depending upon the mix of the census and the occupancy levels at Nathaniel Witherall. Could be a little bit higher, could be less. One of the things that I'd like to just update you on, this is still draft, but as of today, I completed the financial statements for the month of March, but I still need to review them. And the revenue number, which was 336 in the package that I gave out during the budget meeting, is now $440,000, which is in excess of the amount that we're requesting, the $400,000. Also, the loss, which was $281,000 last month, is now down to a loss of a deficit of $161,000, which is just about $45,000 favorable to our budget, which was at $209, and that is not only our appropriated expenditures, it is our enterprise expenditures included in that number also. So we made a big stride in a month of in the month of March. I believe at the budget meeting, I said we would be about $100,000 favorable. It came in just short of $120,000.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Stone?
Can you identify the quality of what made up that differential, the favorable?
Well, what we did is we've gone into a new line of business, basically, which is commercial insurance, and that is sort of a Medicare type of a base, so we have some days out there for that. But also, when you look at product other than Medicaid within Nathaniel Witherall, there is an inline mix of revenues and cost. And when you look at Medicare in particular, you'll see that you have certain items that bill out at about $260 a day, which is on the low side. And on the high side, there are billings close to $700,000 a day. If you were to take and look at the higher one, you're going to have, again, a higher cost associated with it. So it's just a mix within Nathaniel Witherall. Our private pay census, we had a budget of 22. It is currently running 25.5. So we're just playing the mix and bringing in whatever we can to make ends meet. We hope to be, by the end of the year, break even. Just slightly break even, and right now it seems like we're heading there. The census as of, let's see if I've got that sheet of paper with me. I don't have that with me. The census as of last night, the 19th, was 93.9, and a week ago when we came before the Budget Committee, we were at 93.4, so our census is improving. Our census as of last night was 95.5, so our census is going back where it needs to be.
That's the revenue side. On the expense side, any particular line item?
The line items that would go up would be those items that are variable. It would be those items that deal with rehab. As you put in more minutes of rehab for a resident. It would be prescription drugs, and that's a real tricky area because it should be something that goes along pretty easy, but you could also have big spikes in that area in the event that you come in, somebody who just had a newfound type of ailment, you could have a large cost component of that. You have oxygen, and you have a couple other items.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Mr. Simon?
In the audit committee report, they indicated that you're going to write off in excess of $450,000 this year?
No, we are not going to write off $450,000. That is the amount of the bad debts reserve that Nathaniel Witherall has. We anticipate to write off somewhere around $62,000 worth of doubtful accounts, and they will be presented to the Finance Committee of Nathaniel Witherall this coming Monday, and hopefully approval, and then go through the process to write off that amount of money.
And that would be a reduction of revenue then?
That
to
would
the
not be a
town?
reduction of revenue. That would be a reduction of a reduction in the reserve. It'd be booked to the reserve.
And is the reserve reducing revenue already?
The reserve reduces revenue already, yes. We accrue on a monthly basis that bad debt reserve.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, why don't we take up then if somebody could move the subject to release and have that just part of the application that we are voting on, I think that would be cleaner. Mr. Mason?
Yes, I would move the subject to release for $94,000 in the appropriate codes. One's in 142 and the other's in supplies, the 325.
96. 96. It was 304 and then 96 to make the full.
Okay. I would move that subject to release of the 96 to be approved by the BET in the January meeting.
June.
I'm sorry, in our June meeting, 09.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Stone, that we approve the $400,000 subject to release 61,000 in connection with line 51420 and 35,000 in connection with line 53250 to the acceptance of a report by the Nathaniel Witherall Board evidencing the need for this additional, or this $96,000. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? 11-0-0. Item 3 now comes before us, the assessor's report. Our assessor, Ted Courtney. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have my report, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for the assessor, Mr. Finger?
Mr. Gortney, on item number 5, Board of Assessment Appeals, you indicate that the BAA decision letters were mailed out in March. After the Board of Assessment Appeals makes their decision on these appeals, do you and your department review them and just kind of get a sense as to why they were making the adjustments and see if there's any trends? I know once before you said you had, but is that a continuing process?
We do make a cursory review of it. We don't have any authority to make any changes, of course, but we do review what has been done by the board.
And you factor in, do they give reasons for the changes in the assessments based upon the hearings that they hold?
Generally, no. Sometimes they do, but as a general rule, there's one person that hears it and may make a note about the reason, but then it's voted by the 5 members of the board, and they just vote for it.
So you have no idea as to why they may have reduced somebody's assessment?
Generally speaking, the one person hearing it will make some note or some guidance about why they made the decision. Plus, we have also the reasons that the appellant made.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for the assessor? Did I have one? Is there any current pending legislation regarding when we would have to do our next revow?
There is legislation pending that would allow some municipalities the option of deferring a revow, but that still has not been decided.
Just so we're all clear, we're still on schedule for the 2010 revow.
Yes, we are.
Further questions? I have a motion to accept the assessor's report.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Finger. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Item 4 now comes before us, BET committees and special project team reports. You should have in your packet 6 reports. I know Mr. Noren has a comment relative to the audit committee report, but before we get to there, are there any comments or questions relative to the other special project teams or BET committee reports? Mr. Norton, relative to the audit committee.
Yes, Mr. Chair. As I indicated in my report to the board, that there was a meeting held this morning with 2 representatives from Bloom Shapiro, including Vanessa Rosito, who's the partner in charge, and a conference call with Munis. Actually, I think they're in Lafayette, Louisiana, as well as members from both the Finance Department and from the Board of Education Budget Office. This involves an item that has been in a management letter for the last 2 fiscal years in implementing the Munis system and its compatibility with the Finance Department's allocation of expenditures, as well as items that are carried forward, the requisitions that are carried forward, and purchase orders. And actually, it's my opinion that the meeting that was held this morning, the resolution is that there is no resolution. It's an incompatible, basically, the Munis system, the way in which it's designed, is not compatible with the way in which we operate in the town. And my concern that I have, and for the audit committee, is that this item on the management letter, this management letter item will remain with the CAFRA, the annual report, the way in which it's currently structured. And I believe that the partner, Vanessa Rosito from Bloom Shapiro, has become quite aware of the incompatibility of what she's requiring in the Munis system application. And we hope to have and I believe the Finance Department hopes to have a resolution of this in the next 30 days, because it does impact greatly purchasing orders from the Board of Education, which they begin as soon as for the next fiscal year, as soon as the budget process is completed, actually by June 1st. So that, I just wanted to bring everybody up to date on the meeting that took place this morning. Actually, it was a 2-hour meeting upstairs in the conference room for the Finance Department.
Questions or comments for Mr. Norton relative to either the audit report or his comments concerning the recent meeting of the Audit Committee? Move to item 5, the Comptroller's report.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Norton. You covered part of my controller's report. I will now direct you to page 1. The Nathaniel Witherall Long Range Business Plan. This is an update as where we stand. There was 4 firms contacted. Number 1 was Weiser, and they have submitted a proposal. Number 2 was Boom Shapiro, the certified public accountants. And this is not the audit branch. This is the consultant branch out of Hartford or West Hartford, and they declined the engagement. Number 3 was Health Dimensions. Got a call from Health Dimensions this morning. They've basically got the request for proposal, finished, and they were looking for direction as to who to send it to and the process that ensues. Number 4 is McGladrey and Pullen. I spoke to them about a week ago. I'm going to follow up this week and find out where they are in the process. And what I did was, based on the questions from Health Dimension, I called Joan Sullivan, the purchasing agent, and we're meeting Wednesday morning to go over the process as far as the potential for hiring, the interview process, who needs to get involved, the contract that needs to be done, and anything that's associated with hiring the firm. So that's the status report on the long-range business plan financial feasibility study. Questions?
Why don't we stop there, only because of the importance of this proposal. Under the scenario that you laid out in terms of the numbers of responses to your request, what do you see as a reasonable timeline for their review of the revised long-range business plan, and then for the BET's review of the consultant's report?
They all asked that same question, and they basically all guaranteed that they could have the work done by the summertime, ready for, at the latest, an RTM vote, if possible, in probably either July or September for the BET. So we're shooting for the summertime as far as the BET review before final vote, depending on whether or not you want to assign anybody from the BET to review the process. But right now, I would say probably BET July and RTM September.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, Mr. Minarski, I think at one of our recent meetings, Mr. Simon had suggested Health Dimensions Group, and I thought that was a good idea because that particular organization has people other than just financial accountants. I think that it should be considered, or some similar firms to that, since Nathaniel Witherall is changing its staffing model. I know at one point, Mr. Ormsby talked with the Peter Bardwell firm, and they had suggested another firm, Kurt Salmon, which I think appears to have a wider source of resources to evaluate such a plan. Have you considered talking with Kurt Salmon? I mean, again, it's my understanding that Mr. Ormsby, was just looking to aid you and the BET in terms of going back to someone who had previously worked for Witherall in terms of programming to come up with appropriate financial name to review the plan.
I haven't. Basically, I did take one. I believe the Weiser one came from Mr. Ormsby, or he was a conduit from someone else. The Health Dimension was at the recommendation of Mr. Simon, the BET, and the other 2 were accounting firms.
Well, again, through the chairman, yes. Again, since they're changing the staffing model, it may be appropriate to have a firm that understands, this model and, its viability, since I think it's been used primarily, on a very limited basis and not yet or by commercial firms. So understanding that the model of care, which is, very significant, may need to have someone can understand the basic change in the fundamentals that impact the financial plan.
Well, I'll take this as a recommendation, and I'll defer to the chairman. I could start tomorrow, but it might delay the process 2 or 3 weeks, because the other three have had head starts and have finished their proposals. My question is, do you want me to include Kurt Solomon?
I think what we need to do is look at what in fact we've received to date, see how long of a delay this would take, or this would allow for, and see if that in fact impacts a realistic time frame. One of the other things we have to be cognizant of is, and we've had this discussion, I think, back in December of 2008 with Nathaniel Witherell, is the need to make sure that we come up with our recommendation, because my understanding is Project Renew continues to move forward, and as a result of that, money is being spent on building a building. We want to make sure that a long-range business plan is accepted by all of the necessary parties, including the RTM in this body. So, we have to make sure it's done right, but we also have to make sure that we move this process along. So I think a conversation about when the responses are going to be provided by Health Dimensions, McGladrey and Pullen, and then whether or not we go out and seek yet a fifth sort of interview or a preliminary conversation with a fifth agency.
Okay.
So we'll take all those factors in, and a conversation should occur in the next couple days. Other comments, questions, Mr. Stone?
So this is the first time I'd heard about the firm that Ms. Tarkenton referred to, and apparently they have some in-depth knowledge on this process. I would support any reasonable, let's call it additional time, to try and get an idea from them as to how long it would be for them to respond. We're talking about a sizable project, and the qualifications for that firm that's going to vet this adjusted business plan, I think, is critical. On the other side, I guess I recall several years ago, I think some of those who were involved in looking at the work done by the firm who did analyze the business plan, I think there were some criticisms at the time, and I just would say I think we should spread the net to the degree we can if it's not going to lead to an unreasonable delay.
Other comments or questions? First on this issue, and then we'll open it up to the other remaining portions of the comptroller's report. Okay. How about the other items contained in the comptroller's report? Does comptroller have a wish to make any statements or highlight any portion of his report?
I'll take questions.
Okay. Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Minorski, the cash forecast report, is that part of your report or is it the treasurer's report?
That's part of the treasurer's report, but that'll be next.
Okay.
Mr. Stone.
Peter, what's the current thinking about by the retirement board as far as the quality of engagement, the firm that they're looking for as far as possibly replacing New England Pension Consultants? And here I'm focusing on whether or not they want to stay with the pure consultancy, or are they thinking about opening it up to a firm that would handle the money on a purely discretionary basis?
Mr. Stone's question refers to the RFP coming up to replace potentially the incumbent New England Pension Consultants, correct?
Right.
I think everybody knows that New England Pension Consultants was the same consultant that worked for Fairfield. Fairfield is the one that had the problem with the feeder fund Maxim, which fed to the Madoff problem. As far as they have replaced NEPC through an RFP process. As far as your question, I haven't polled the other four, and I don't have a feeling one way or the other. I'd like to go through the process and see what's out there as far as the consultant.
Since you've raised it, I want to make a point that it wasn't because of the experience that Fairfield has had with NEPC, but other issues that have come up in the last several years with NEPC, and it's by definition a different approach, NEPC and others of that type, different approach than had been followed by the retirement board for, I think, 20-some-odd years prior to NEPC's engagement. And that clearly, in other words, the retention of a firm that handles the investment on a purely discretionary basis is quite different from an NEPC type of engagement. So it would seem, I think it's appropriate for that board to have had at least discussions as to which direction they want to move in.
They are going through the RFP process as we speak. As far as is your question, will they replace them?
Well, it's maybe deeper than that. Is the type of firm that they're hoping to engage. If they want to continue to stay with a consultant like an NEPC, then it becomes fairly evident that they would be opening it up again, I assume, to NEPC and others of that type, pure consultants. If they want to move from this type of an approach back to that of a discretionary money manager, the type that had been engaged, and Russell Trust had been the manager up until about 2001, I believe. And that's an approach that many firms, many pension funds and institutions employ. And I was questioning whether or not they've had that type of a discussion internally within the board.
No.
They haven't.
On this point, just so that the BET members are aware, the comptroller and I have had several conversations over the past several months regarding RFPs and when we go out to bid, so that we're on a routine cycle, so that it automatically comes up, especially because BETs change every 2 years, so that we don't get into a situation that we found ourselves in several years ago where, say, for instance, our insurance broker had been the same insurance broker for years, if not a decade, and that there was no review process of their relationship with the town. Out of this came one of the discussion points was that the consultant for the retirement fund had been in existence, I think it's going on 5 years now or so, maybe even longer, and that it was time, irrespective of the comments you've made, Mr. Stone, and that it was time for us to go back out to the market. Now, the discussion that we had did not revolve around changing that format, but one would hope, and I hope you take this back to the retirement board, that they take this opportunity to not only look at who's delivering the services, but in what manner the services are being delivered, and if in fact that's still the best methodology for delivering those services. And I would hope that our liaisons would work with the retirement board into maybe at least starting that conversation, and if it's a short conversation, so be it, but that should be looked at.
I will deliver the message.
Mr. Norton.
I haven't seen the RFP, even though I'm one of the liaisons. Have the issues that have just been raised by Mr. Stone been addressed in the RFP? I don't believe.
It's Mr. Lavin's working with Mr. Latham in the purchasing department. The board hasn't seen the RFP yet. They will either see it for the first time Thursday. I'm talking about the finished product, and we can share it with the liaisons and anybody from the BET that wishes to see it.
Because I believe what Mr. Stone is addressing is different methodologies of retaining an advisor whether you call him a consultant who just does consulting, as opposed to somebody who does both consulting work and money management. And they're two different methodologies. And unless it's included within the RFP, you're not going to attract the different entities who would satisfy the concerns that Mr. Stone is raising.
The next retirement board meeting is
Thursday
Thursday morning, and I'm sure that I will see that it gets discussed.
Other questions or comments for the comptroller's report? Is there a motion to accept the Mr. Simon?
So, on the bottom of page 3, next where it says above tax collections. So this is the issue where town employees drive town vehicles in the town carpool. Just want to make sure I'm dealing with the right issue where it says the issues involved with implementation of processing a motor vehicle record check.
Our bigger concern is the employees having the accidents, multiple accidents. We're currently working with the fleet director and special projects coordinator. We're looking at a firm that does this professionally to see what are the steps to do this, either in-house or through an independent firm. We not only are looking to make sure that people are properly licensed, we're looking for a mechanism to see if they are dangerous drivers. For example, is there a data pool out there that says they've had their license suspended for a couple times, et cetera. So it's not only that, it's just as important, because this comes out of an accident review board establishment noted further up in the report, and an accident audit. So it's a combination of issues as far as checking motor vehicle records.
Right, but when I looked at the accident report, not very many of them were, or if any, were someone going from town hall to go to a building site to inspect the building site. Most of them were not in that area. I think the issue that I raised here was just to make sure that anybody who drives a town vehicle has a valid motor vehicle permit. And to make sure that, because we now have all these people in town hall or wherever they're working, they can go and request a car and drive it. And how do we know they have a driver's license? That was the point.
Well, that was one of our points, and that's the reason why we're continuing this. We're trying to combine it to satisfy your request and tie it into the accident review board and the accident audit.
Right, then the second question is on the bottom of page 3 with the tax collections, which I now finally understand how we got to the 99.32% of the general fund budgeted levy, because you were able to produce a report that shows what we've collected for the current tax year.
Yes.
And we budgeted 99.35%?
Of the tax billed, which is higher than what's in the budget.
So in order to make the budgeted number, we would still have to collect $1.8 million over the next 3 months.
Whatever. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to accept the comptroller's report? Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Stone. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions, 11-0-0. Comptroller for the treasurer's report.
Mr. Norton, you have the Treasury's report. I'll take questions. I apologize for the font size on the cash flow, but there's a lot of numbers there. Mr. Norton, you had a question on the cash flows?
I didn't have a question, Mr. Peter. I just wanted to know, is this the treasurer's report or is it your report? Because it could be either. And because it comes basically with the treasurer's report. That was my question. Who is presenting this? Are you presenting this, or is it coming from the treasurer?
Both. I'm presenting it, and it's coming from the treasurer.
Well, I suppose that-
These two documents are part of the job description of the treasurer. I think there's a charter requirement that the treasurer does have a report monthly. I'm the presenter, not the architect.
Questions?
And this was a BET requirement from about 6 months ago to include this second document. Oh,
Mr. Simon?
When I compare the February cash report to the March cash report, it shows that our we projected in February we'd have $75 million in cash, and for the end of March, and now we have $71 million. And for the 1 month, we've gone down $4 million in our projected cash flow.
Okay.
But it's not clear why.
There's a couple reasons. I don't have the February one in front of me, but there's, for example, if the ECS came in March, it would be $1.7 million. It's going to come in April. There is a check run. She does a lot of
But the June number went down $4 million. The number you expect at the end of June also went down by $4 million.
She's just refining the numbers as we go along. Again, this is a report is not your usual one if you went over the last 20 or 25 years because of the sharp drop in the revenues. And then there's also, we have expenditure flows in the past that are not the same historically. For example, the first selectment went out 6-7 months ago and not only reminded everybody of the hiring freeze, he imposed a spending cutback, not necessarily a freeze, but he wanted the departments to be conscious of spending. So historically, we had this report based on the expenditure flows from last year and the revenue flows from last year, and because of the changes have been so dramatic, we're adjusting to it each month. We can go back and pick piece by piece that shows why the revenues went down by $3 million. It's a combination of both revenue and expenditure changes.
Well, but I would expect that if we reduce spending, cash flow would increase. And we have we use a set of reports that the finance department provides us every month that shows what we expect for conveyance tax, building permitted interest. I would think that those two reports would be integrated into this cash flow report, that we don't have the treasurer using one set of assumptions and the finance department using a second set of assumptions.
They, every month, get together to synchronize, if that's the proper word, to get the same numbers on the revenue side. Again, the expenditure side, it's all timing, depending on the size of the runs each week, expenditure runs.
But from my perspective, expenditures keep decreasing, not increasing, and that still doesn't explain why our cash flow projection decreased by $4 million, which is a big number.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll analyze it, and we won't even wait for the next meeting. I'll email the full board when the reconciliation.
Other questions? All those in favor, motion to accept the treasurer's report?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Norton. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions, 11-0-0. Item 7 now comes before us, the approval of the BET minutes 4. We'll take these separately. March 16th, 2009. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mason,
Second.
second by Mr. Raymer. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention, 11-0-0. Approval of the public hearing of March 17th, 2009. Is there a motion? Moved by Mr. Finger, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention, 11-0-0. I have a motion to approve the BET budget decision meeting dated March 19th, 2009. Moved by Mr. Raymer, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention, 11-0-0. Item 8 now comes before us, the officers' report. Mr. Stone?
No, thank you, Mr.
Ms. Tarkington? I have a couple of items this evening. First, we'd like to welcome Channel 79. My understanding is they're actually televising this meeting live tonight, so we thank you for that. Still looking forward to having the cone room outfitted so that meetings can occur up there in the short term. It was ironic when I got a call today to give me the heads up that it was being televised live. My reaction was, isn't it always live? But I guess we've just been televised or taped before, and so now we're here live out to the general public, which is excellent. Thank you very much for being here and the time that you spend. The next item is, obviously, it's the RTM budget month coming up. I will again ask all BET members if they would commit to at least one district meeting, and then help in attending the RTM standing committee meetings. A spreadsheet will go out, and I will ask you to give your first and second choices, as well as if there's a particular standing committee that you care to attend. I do know, in fact, that there are several standing committees that have already met and will continue to meet in May. The BOC has met, the Finance Committee has met, Health and Human Services has met, and we've had BET representation at all of those meetings. So that's been a good step in terms of helping our fellow volunteers in looking at this budget and all of the issues that surround the 9-10 budget. So I think we're off to a very good start, and hopefully we'll have participation at all of the other RTM meetings, and that they can deliberate them with full answers. Obviously, it's also this time of year that the Finance Department is extremely busy, with RTM members going to the Finance Department looking for many of the answers to their questions. So once again, thank you in advance to Mr. Geiger and Mr. Mynarski for all the work that they do. Tomorrow, there will be a meeting with the First Selectman's Office and the Fire Department, a couple members of the BET, concerning the Fire Department, looking at the King Street Fire Station and trying to move forward on an agenda, trying to focus our attention as to what are the issues, so that we can refine that discussion, so that ultimately that comes back to us. I'm assuming that will be the first in what will be a series of meetings. To the extent that BET members are interested in this topic, please email me and hopefully be able to get the members who are interested in this topic together in a room so that your voice can be heard. But don't despair if you're not going to this first one. There will be several others. And rest assured that we'll try to get this process moving forward with the First Selectman's Office. And as all of you know, through the comments that I had made at the Budget Committee meeting back in March, that we're looking forward to this discussion, and if in fact an application is made to take it out of the budget cycle. So we're looking to get the ball rolling. The First Selectman and I met with the Board of Realtors about a week ago, once again talking about the budget, talking about the state of Greenwich, and I think it's important that we get out as much information as we possibly can relative to the 9-10 budget and the 10-11 budget. Lastly, a homework assignment, if you will. Nathaniel Witherell met with several members of their board, along with Ms. Tarkington, regarding the revolving fund. As you may all know, the Nathaniel Witherell is looking to ask us for permission to establish the revolving fund. That is something that they would like to take up sooner rather than later. I would ask you all to think about that. If you do have questions surrounding the revolving fund, if you can convey those questions over to the Finance Department, so that when they do come forward with their presentation, those questions are already incorporated in their presentation, and that we can have a healthy discussion as to whether or not it's appropriate to, in fact, have a revolving fund for Nathaniel Witherell, and if you have concerns, it's better to have them addressed up front when they draft their resolution. So please think about that, and I think they would like to start presenting that in the May-June timeframe. So if you can get those questions into the Finance Department, I'm sure they would find that particularly helpful. And then, as you all know, we will take up the mill rate after the RTM meeting and our May BET meeting. With that, we will move on to item 9 on our agenda, old business, the first one. I'll ask the town assessor to approach concerning online access to assessment records. Our assessor, Ted Courtney. Thank you.
Good evening again. We've had both positive and negative feedback on the idea of having online access to the assessment records. I would have to say that a majority of the feedback has been negative, and I'm seeking your guidance now of how to deal with this issue.
As everybody here, at least on the BET knows, there's been a special project team relative to the reval, but then they've sort of morphed into looking at this issue as well. As you all know from the emails that I've passed along to the finance department, which then gets spread out to the full BET, there's been a lot of communication surrounding this topic, and I think it is appropriate for us to make a recommendation or act on what was originally your recommendation pursuant to the line item in the budget that was approved by both this body last year as well as the RTM for the current fiscal year. And so with that, I will ask Ms. Tarkington if she has a few comments, being one of the two members of the special project team.
Well, certainly, Mr. Simon and I met with Mr. Gwartney and discussed his proposal for putting information online in response to this board, and we also get a better understanding of the information and where it's also available online, and how Mr. Gwartney has been working with the firm Manatron, I think, to make this information available. So, given that, I guess at this point I would like to move that the BET recommend to the assessor to terminate the contract with Monitran Inc. And to in regard to putting online access to the town's assessment records.
Ms. Tarkington has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Let me just follow up then on that motion. I think based on the conversations that occurred about a year ago pertaining to this issue, maybe even more so than that, I think the town assessor acted in good faith in terms of going out and doing exactly what the conversation was last year. And it was only after that presentation was made that we heard any real objection to what we were going to do in terms of putting the information online. The information is already available through private sites, and most other municipalities have that information for their particular towns. But I think based on the level of conversation that we've been able to have with individual members of the community as well as the neighborhood associations, that at this point in time, there seems to be such a high level of concern about having the town put this information online. It's made us rethink the issue. And so I will support the motion by Ms. Tarkington and Mr. Simon. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Mr. Gwartney, thank you. The second item under old business, Bloom Shapiro contract for option years. I call on Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. When this body, the BET, engaged Bloom Shapiro to perform the audit, they signed a 5-year contract which would have 2 years and 3 one-year options. The first year option is fiscal year 2009. Last month, I received the engagement letter because under GAAP rules, the chair of the audit committee has to engage our external auditor, outside auditor. So on behalf of the audit committee, we're proposing this motion that the BET authorize the audit committee to exercise the contract option with Bloom Shapiro to perform the annual audit for the fiscal year 2009 for the town of Greenwich. And further resolved, so that we don't have to be bringing this back for the next 2 years, that the audit committee, at its discretion, exercise for fiscal years 2010 and fiscal years 2011 the contract options with Bloom Shapiro for the annual audit for the town of Greenwich.
Been a motion by Mr. Norton.
Actually, it's on behalf of the audit committee, Mr. Chair.
On behalf of the audit committee, is there a second? Second. Is that Mr. Finger? Yep. Okay. Second by Mr. Finger. Just so that everybody knows, obviously, the BET works through its full membership, the 12 of us or the 11 of us here tonight. And so this would be a motion that would allow the audit committee at its discretion to exercise 10 and 11. Just want to make sure everybody is aware of not only the having us exercise it for this year, but then exercising it for 2 years through a committee.
And, Mr. Chair, it was just indicated to me that I had indicated in this option that the options year 2010, 2011, that the exercise be completed in March of each year, which gives us plenty of time if we're not going to exercise the option, and at the same time gives us plenty of time to advise Bloom Shapiro to proceed with the audit. And they normally begin their work the end of May.
Question. Mr. Kelly.
Why are we delegating the authority to the audit committee?
Well, basically, because the audit committee is the one who first engages the outside auditor and deals with the audit process as it's going through, and it's presented to the audit committee in its completion to be presented to the full board, the completed audit each year.
I know, but this has money attached to it, right?
Money in the sense that the contract, the terms of the contract include what we will pay Bloom Shapiro to perform the audit for fiscal year 2009, fiscal year 2010, and fiscal years 2011. Is that your question?
I don't see where we would ever delegate authority to two people on the board to authorize the expenditure of money. That's my confusion here. I don't know why we would do that.
The current contract, which was approved by this board 2 years ago, indicates the amount of money that will be paid to the outside auditor to perform the basic audit for fiscal years 2010, 2011. So in effect, we've already contracted for that, provided we exercise the options.
With the exercise of the option, we could decide not to exercise the options, or you could, you and whoever the two people are on the audit committee.
There's 4 members of the audit
Four
committee.
members committee could make that determination not to exercise it, right?
Yes, but I think we would only do that with input from the full board.
But usually what would happen is you'd make a recommendation to us, and we would vet that recommendation and then make a determination. I'm leery of doing that, so that's just my position.
Ms. Tarkington.
As I understand it, this is just to exercise that option with Bloom and Shapiro firm. If for some reason the audit committee determines not to exercise the option, the RFP and the selection of the auditor that would come out of that RFP would come back to this board. This is only to exercise the option to
Of any-
proceed with Blum and Shapiro. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the existing contract, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Kremick.
That's clarification. So you're not asking to delegate authority to the audit committee. You're asking this board right now to vote on the option?
Yes.
Because that seems different than what was presented. And here's my concern, and it's a little bit similar to Mr. Kelly's concern. Normally, this board will follow the recommendation of the audit committee in hiring the auditors. And normally, there is not an issue with respect to hiring an auditor. However, in the past, there have been issues with respect to who the town hires for auditor. And in the past, this board has, in fact, voted against decisions that were recommended by the audit committee. So I think as a principle, we should not delegate that authority. So I think it's very clear if in fact you're not asking us to delegate to the audit committee, but to vote on the exercise of the option, that would be something different. That would be something this board has done, which is to exercise the authority that the board has as a board to do something like that. And it seems to me, but if on the other hand, what you're asking for is for us to delegate our authority to the audit committee to decide whether or not to exercise the option, then that would not be proper, and that would not be a good delegation of authority.
Other questions or comments?
I mean,
As Mr. Simon.
it's clear that the audit committee is asking us to delegate our authority to them to exercise the options without our approval.
In the second further resolve, in the second paragraph.
Right, the first paragraph I'm fine with, for this one, but I don't believe we should
I
delegate
mean,
that
also,
authority.
the amount of time that we normally take to pass the first paragraph has been greatly exceeded by the discussion on the second paragraph. So, I mean, we
By
could just go back to
tenfold.
what we used to do, which is just pass the first paragraph.
Right,
every
by
year.
tenfold.
Doesn't take very long.
The reason in which the second paragraph is here is, this board agreed 2+ years ago to retain an outside auditor for a 5-year period. Wanted to review it in 3, 4, and 5, and for 4 years 3, 4, and 5. The audit committee is the one that has a responsibility for having the audit prepared, and the audit committee then presents the completed audit to the full board. The intent of the second paragraph is to give the audit committee the authority to be able to renew the contract, to exercise the options for years 4 and 5. And that's all its intent is.
I just disagree. That's
Other comments?
me.
Mr. Mynarski.
If I could speak to the first further resolve, I'd request that if you're going to exercise an option, you're probably going to do it to change auditors. I would suggest that you move it back to January or February. It gives us more time through the RFP process, because, as we've imposed a requirement that they get done before December of each year. And if you go out and hire a new auditor, their first year is their toughest year, they're not going to meet that December requirement. All I'm suggesting is that you take if the March gets through, that you use a January or earlier than March date.
I have no difficulty with changing the dates. We can't do it before January, and I think that March is the end of the time frame in which we could do it, to give both the existing auditor and any successor plenty of time to be able to do the preliminary work. And I'll leave it up to the discretion of this board.
What I'm referring to is the RFP process.
Right, I understand that.
That would take 2, 3, 4 months.
Right. I have no difficulty changing the date in the second paragraph to January.
I guess the question is, and has become, we've spent some time on the second paragraph, and if you brought this forward this time in 2010 and then this time in 2011, it would have been less than the conversation that just took place now. But Mr. Finger, go ahead.
Although I was the person that seconded the motion that's on the table right now, I think it would be prudent in light of the point that you just made, Mr. Chairman, about the amount of time that's being spent here, and Mr. Simon made the same point, that that we consider amending the motion by just including that first paragraph entitled motion and deleting the further resolved.
I would second that motion.
Well, the motion was presented on behalf of the audit committee.
As a member of the audit, I'm sorry.
And so my sense is, and I'll maybe look to Mr. Crumick for his parliamentarian expertise there, whether or not, unless all the members of the committee agreed to that change, that we would first have to vote the current resolution down, and then that can become brought forward as a second resolution.
I think all you have to do is, the motion's been made and it's before us by the committee. I think all you have to do is amend it the way you would amend any other motion.
Okay, so why don't we do that, then consider it to be the Finger-Raymer motion to delete paragraph 2 of the audit committee's motion, which was moved by Mr. Noren, second by Mr. Finger for the whole motion. Mr. Raymer.
And the purpose of my asserting the desire to be the second on that motion is because I too served as one of the members on the audit committee, and I thought it would be comforting to the board at large to be hearing from the audit committee members that we would favor the amendment, so that just the first motion and not the second component is being voted on.
Any other discussion on the motion to amend the audit committee's motion?
Doesn't matter, we just vote through this.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion to amend signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Now on the motion as amended. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 11-0-0. Item 10 now comes before us under new business. There is nothing on our agenda relative to new business, but I would note that we seem to have the Commission on Aging here. And so are you just here to listen? Did you think something was on the agenda?
I have a question if I'm able to.
Sure, why don't you approach and we'll. Sam Heibler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, this is the middle of the application season for senior tax relief, and I've had a number of calls in regard to the ceiling, the $570,000 ceiling that's in the budget, and the fact that we have larger tax credits available this year, and of course a new category with income now up to $60,000. And in reviewing the budget, there was just a question I had about the language for the elderly tax relief. It said that it's currently in the fiscal 10 budget for $570,000. Any increases in this program must be offset by additional savings within the budget. And we didn't know what the process was. Is that a matter of savings during the budget year? And if so, how does that impact the current application process and the fact that some people may be otherwise eligible given their income, but if the $570,000 is a ceiling, may not be admitted to the program since there would be no savings as of the 15th of May or even the 1st of July?
So we also have BET members assigned to this topic. I'm hesitant to essentially add this and start discussing it without having it properly on our agenda so that others who are interested in this topic would have the ability to hear the discussion here today. So I would suggest that we work through our committee and liaison and special project team members of the BET, that your concerns be addressed. I know I saw some email traffic, at least in part, addressing that. And as you know, we set our limits, or we will set our limit at our May BET meeting. And so that's how I would prefer that this be handled.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Mr. Kremick.
just a point of information, or a question to you. I don't, my RTM days are too far away. I can't remember quite what the terminology is, but when we set the mill rate, we're going to specifically take a look at the limits on the senior program, according to the way the ordinance was enacted, right?
That's my understanding from how the ordinance was enacted, unless somebody else has a different opinion. I think that's exactly why we set it up that way.
Right, so this will be on our agenda when we set the mill rate, and we do have flexibility, and we're not limited to the number in the budget.
So that would be independent of any savings realized in the budget year, as I understand it.
Mr. Simon, if you want to address that specific question, but I really don't want to get into a full-fledged discussion on this, as I do think that it's important that we stick to our agenda, but
The sentence he's referring to was written in the guidelines. And so that was last summer. So in the intervening period between last summer and today, there could have been savings in the budget as presented.
So it's this year's budget.
The budget coming up that was presented and passed by the BET, that's the budget.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I think, is that the only issue you have for us
That's it.
tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't believe that there is any other new business to come before us. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Kremick.
It's funny that the subject of aging should come before this body. And I am somewhat hesitant to mention this since we're live on television, but I am reliably informed that our chairperson will have a significant birthday tomorrow. And and we have somewhere hidden in this room cupcakes for everyone here. Now, since we are live on television, I imagine people are getting into their cars right now, heading to Town Hall for cupcakes. So if you're watching this on tape delay, too bad. But after the meeting, there will be cupcakes, and understand Happy Birthday may be sung in various keys.
On that note, thank you. And is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you. Thank you all.